Hello indie game fan, save some money in the GOG Halloween Sale, and I'm not really a horror game person, so none of these are the jump scare type games, with more action and grimdark ones instead, beginning with Punk Square, an all-action first-person shooter that released earlier this year, putting you in the boots of a super soldier who is woken up from stasis by a mysterious group, breaking him out of a heavily guarded black site. You have amnesia but are quickly put to work blasting away at enemies with superhuman abilities like super strength to toss enemies around, super speed which translates to bullet time, and even stealth and cloaking to become invisible, where this is perhaps the best first encounter assault recon or fear-like game to come along and has great action. One of the potential Game of the Year candidates for this year is Blasphemous 2, the sequel to a fan-favourite Metroidvania that is improved in many ways, but steps back in other areas, which makes it interesting and difficult to evaluate. The core brutal action is fantastic, as is the grimdark world inspired by the Catholic faith, with gorgeous pixel art and brutal animations. So far, so good. There are also 3 weapons to choose from instead of just the sword in the original, which is nice, but the relative openness of the game breaks down as you go along, funneling into more of a linear experience and also having more human-shaped and sized enemies rather than the monstrous bosses of the first game, so it's pros and cons but it's still good overall. Here's something a little different in Brutal Orchestra, an underrated roguelite turn-based RPG from 2021 that's at a decent 30% discount, taking place in Purgatory, in which you are dead and someone has killed you, but unable to accept fate, you gather some friends and allies and attempt to fight your way out. Curiously, the writing and story are actually one of the highlights of this game, as are the weird and interesting character designs in pixel art, but central to it is the combat system. It is pretty much the classic JRPG style turn-based combat that we have come to know and love, but there is a pigment system in which the resource is generated when characters get hit, and you need this pigment to use your abilities, but gathering too much actually hurts you, so it's an interesting strategic choice. I suppose the most classic horror type game in this video is the gorgeous Children of Silentown, a creepy, grimdark adventure game in which our protagonist grows up in a village deep in a forest which is inhabited by monsters, where people disappearing is not uncommon and of course something sinister is going on. Our heroine musters up the courage to explore and find the truth, hence the story begins on a very creepy tale. Instead of ghosts and serial killers, the other common antagonists in horror is that of aliens and monsters, with the excellent Stasis Bone Totem being worth a look as well. While it has an isometric perspective and looks like a CRPG similar to games like Disco Elysium, this is instead a point-and-click adventure game in which you control 3 characters exploring an underwater facility. The deep, dark underwater world might as well be an alien environment, but yet it exists right here on Earth, so there's the additional creep factor to this game, making it a very well-made and tense adventure game. I do of course have to mention Project Zomboid, one of the most popular indie games ever, being a zombie survival simulation game with a focus on the realistic simulation aspect, which makes it very interesting indeed. For example, in order to cook, you need food, a frying pan and a heat source, or where you can break windows to get into houses, but that might set off the alarm which attracts zombies and more. Despite still being in early access after many years, it is probably the best zombie survival simulation game and is always worth going back to. A post-apocalyptic setting can be depressing and terrifying, so how about checking out the cyber wasteland of HAAK, in which our protagonist is fighting his way across in search of his missing brother. The action is sleek and looks awesome, so check out this underrated game at 30% off. One of the most impressive survival city builders is Frostpunk, a game that might have just kicked off a trend and built the foundation for games to come. It is set in a harsh world which has frozen over, in which you're in charge of the last city on Earth, with a central heat source which you need to build and expand radially outwards from, with all sorts of tough decisions to make as you attempt to keep your people alive, so get the complete edition at 75% off in preparation of its sequel, which releases next year. Inscryption is a pretty special deck builder title, which is not exactly a roguelite, instead having meta levels to it since weird and strange things can and will happen, like the creatures on the card talking directly to you, the player. Coming to us from developer Daniel Mullins, who's known for meta games such as Pony Island and the HAAKs, and there's a trick to this game as well, so if you have not played it, I highly recommend this game. Going back to the horror movie trope is CARRION, but with the twist being that you play as the giant alien tentacle monster rather than the hapless humans. You are making your way through the facility and taking revenge on those who imprisoned you by what else than stalking and eating these people. However, you are not completely invulnerable, with pesky weapons like flamethrowers being a concern, but it's perfect for the season, so cozy up with this game. Death is pretty spooky, I guess, which is why Death's Door makes the list, a game in which crows are the Grim Reapers of the world and have to take on various contracts to claim the souls of those destined to die. But your assigned soul is stolen, which has major implications on you and your career, so it's off to chase it down, encountering a realm untouched by death. It's an action-adventure game with almost Souls-like combat, stopping just short of a stamina meter, but it's still pretty deliberate, with the combat and boss fights being the highlight here. More spooky skeletons here since a lich has caused an endless time loop, and you as the loop hero have to find a way to break it. It has a fantastic throwback look, and is roguelite/idle game-ish, but neither of those at the same time, being a very unique title that transcends genre boundaries, which makes it of interest, even more so at 50% discount.
Loop. 1986. The year when it all ended.
Going back to the post-apocalyptic wasteland is Atom RPG, a Fallout 1 and 2 style classic CRPG title, but instead of the US, it is set in the Soviet wasteland, after mutually assured destruction has cleansed the surface of the planet. You play as one of the survivors, exploring this brave new world, encountering new threats and unraveling a dark conspiracy about an organization that wants to exterminate whatever life there is remaining. So if you love the setting and characters of the capital wasteland, I'm sure that this will be of interest as well, comrade. Corruption spreading in the world is a pretty common trope in games, which is the same in Children of Morta, but where you play as members of a family that are sworn to protect the world. It's a roguelite-ish action-adventure RPG, combining the real-time hack-and-slash action of Diablo with a run-based structure and upgrades in between runs. The more I think about it, the more I don't think this is a roguelite, since you can essentially escape the dungeon at any point, and it's not truly run-based, but technicalities aside, the action is fun and has a very compelling gameplay loop. These next games are all under $5 and are value for money, with one of the best games of 2016 and Darkest Dungeon being a must-get if you don't own it. It's a brutal turn-based RPG with a cosmic horror theme in which horrible eldritch monsters have awakened and your party of heroes has to fight back, in which you can permanently lose characters in battle, which will give you a massive heartache but gives combat very real stakes and is excellent because of that. Here's an underrated Metroidvania in 8 Doors Arum's Afterlife adventure, one that is inspired by Korean legends and folktales about a girl who enters the realm of the afterlife in search of her father's soul. I believe the colour palette chosen might not have been a great idea, since brown, black, white and red isn't exactly the most eye-catching, but it's a solid Metroidvania experience, and at 80% off is worth a shot if you love the genre. This game might look familiar, since yes, even at the time, Deep Sky Derelicts was noted to have an art style that is kind of similar to Darkest Dungeon, and in many ways, it's a sci-fi version of that game, but does have new elements that make it their own. For example, you're exploring derelict spaceships and scavenging for loot, having an interesting node-based exploration of the ship, and you do need to extract or to get back to your own ship in order to complete the mission. and where combat includes deck building elements as well, so it's a different enough twist on the formula. I think that the concept of ASCII art is neat in place of pixel art, and while it's not always the most beautiful thing to look at, it's not too bad here, in which Century RPG Black Edition is a dungeon crawling title taking inspiration from games of the past, and is a no-brainer at $1.35 with more GOG sales recommendations in this video.